Yeah, so I'm sharing about Regen Network, and Federica's going to help me with going through the slides here quickly. I'm going to start with a really brief background of what Regen is so that then we can move into how the work that we're doing applies to Regen. So Regen Network uses the monitoring of changes in ecosystem health to create value and ultimately finance for ecosystem regeneration. Next slide. Some core issues that we as a community network are working to solve are breaking down the barriers of entry of cost, time, and trust that we all recognize. Next slide. We're doing this by listening to the community and giving them a seat at the table to create the standards and processes by which credits are created. So it's very much a bottom up versus a top down system that we're working in. Next slide. The tools that we work with to do this are our custom built ledger, which is a proof of stake blockchain that allows for data sharing in a transparent way. The registry that guides and supports in the process of methodologies for credit creation, and our marketplace, that's the storefront and transaction vehicle for the credits. Next slide. Some of the more recent methodologies we've added to our library include Ecometrics Regenerative Land Management Methodology and Colshan Carbon Trust Biochar Methodology. Next slide. These are some upcoming methodologies. And so along with primary indicator of carbon sequestration, you'll notice here that Regen Registry supports listing data related to more holistic monitoring approaches. So what's important to notice here is the move to a wider variety of credits, including biodiversity and the practice of sheep grazing that the EBF activator work will support. Next slide, Federica, please. As we're building in new markets, the common framework that the Lexicon is working to create through the EBF activator will allow builders to better understand what one another is doing and when, where, and how they can collaborate. I think we're all in here because we agree the importance of communication, what we're deciding to communicate, and how. This directly reflects on what we value, the functions we choose to define as services the ecosystem offers us, or what we are asking nature to provide for our well-being. It shows what we think we need. It's a direct reflection of our values. What we choose to define and how we define it reminds us of our place in our ecosystem and hopefully how to better integrate into versus just manage or abstract from nature. If we can shift values through the aligning of the principles arrived at from the 5 work streams of the EBF activator, we can better integrate into and support ecosystem functions and their continued health. As my coworker, Ned Horning, says, we could work towards a new common signaling to buyers about what the credit is, the value of it is, and from a broad perspective, how to interact with credits. This would be hugely impactful and is exactly the type of work that our environmental stewardship credit looks to support, which Ned is gonna now jump on and share with you about that work.
Thanks, Tica. Next slide, please. Oh, can you hear me? Oh, thanks. So we're calling it the Environmental Stewardship Initiative, and this is just a quote that I took out of it's an academic discipline called environmental stewardship, and it summarizes kind of the basic general ethos of what we're trying to achieve as we're developing this framework. All right, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm trying to come up with some sort of keystone phrase that I can say that summarizes what we're trying to do. And I'm still working at it, but one of the concepts is that we're trying to shift the direction of the benefits related to ecosystems. Because right now, most people seem to think of, what benefits or what services are we receiving from ecosystems instead of, how can we contribute to the ecosystem? So basically changing the direction of that arrow. And that's what we're trying to do in this environmental stewardship initiative. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick table. This is the last slide, but it summarizes what we're, some of the contrasts between carbon markets, for instance, or even other outcome-based methodologies, and what we're trying to do in environmental stewardship. And a lot of this was gathered just from my observations over the last several years of kind of observing what's going on in the carbon markets. But one shift is from a single metric carbon to something taking this very holistic view of the environment, shifting from an ecosystem service perspective, where what are we getting from the ecosystem to ecosystem function. That we just want to have good functioning ecosystems. It's not so much important. It's not so important what we're getting from these ecosystems. It's just important that these ecosystems function very well. We're shifting this idea of the data is used to put a price on a credit, and that's basically a reward and punishment system. We want to use data. Data collection is incredibly important, and like somebody had mentioned earlier, there's still a lot we need to learn about our practices and the impact on the environment. And we can use data for knowledge generation. That's going to be a very important pillar of this. The other change is, instead of putting the monetary value on a natural resource, it's more put on what does it cost to do something. So it's one of the big shifts is this idea with carbon credits, especially. It's how much money can I make? How much money can I make from this land? How much money is this worth? And shifting that to what is enough to do this. How much is enough instead of focusing on maximizing profit. Also, that most carbon markets and a lot of other methodologies are based on outcomes. There can be some outcome-based projects in the environmental stewardship program, but most of them are focused on practices. It's more of a practice-based approach. But I know there's a lot of criticism of practice-based approaches, but we're trying to address those criticisms. Also, carbon markets have a very high bar of entry. We're trying to develop things that make it very simple for people to participate in this kind of program. The carbon credits, most of the money is going to other people. It's not going to the people on the ground that are actually doing the work. This is an attempt to get most of the money to the people that are actually doing the work. Anyway, to sum up all this with the EBF framework, what we're hoping is that it's going to help provide clarity around the benefits, both from ecosystems and also, going the other direction, the benefits to the ecosystems. So I think that's it.
Ned?
Yes.
Ned? Hi, sorry. Do you mind expanding just real quick for the point of this last slide, the credit based on project outcomes and credit based on project practices?
Sure. So, for example, with carbon markets, the credit is based on the outcome of how much carbon is sequestered. And there are issues with that because, with carbon markets, the ecosystem service is carbon sequestration and storage, but we're completely ignoring carbon emissions, which is really what's going to, that's what's really tied to ecosystem health. It's more it would be the carbon emissions. But anyway, so that's carbon markets are based on the outcomes, what is actually measured. The project or something that's credits that are based on practices would be, for example, there's a certain agroforestry methodology that's been shown to have ecosystem function benefits. Well, that should just be implemented. If we know that if we have very high expectations that that's going to have a positive outcome, we should encourage people to do it and not worry so much about how much carbon is going to be sequestered and how much, how can we measure that and put a price on it. Let's provide people with enough funding to actually implement those methodologies, but we're going to collect data to see how well it's doing. It's just that the price going back to the farmers or the people on the ground that are doing this are not going to be impacted by how much carbon they're sequestering. they're going to be, rewarded for doing a good practice. And if for some reason they're not sequestering enough carbon, instead of being punished by, spending more for sampling than they'd be getting back in credits, they should still be rewarded because the expectation was that it was going to provide great outcomes, and it didn't. So we need to understand why that is. So we want to collect data. The data collection is very important. We want to collect data, understand what went wrong there. Maybe that methodology doesn't work in that environment, or maybe they did something that wasn't quite right. But anyway, those farmers, the people that are actually doing the work, shouldn't be the ones that are punished if the expectations aren't met. We should use that experience as a learning experience. It really should be knowledge generation as one of the big benefits that comes out of this. Did that help? I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling on.